Good afternoon and welcome. I'm David Feist and I will be presenting the webinar today. Thank you for joining ANAB for our complimentary webinar on internal audits and gap analysis, a different purpose and approach. Please note we're recording this webinar, so it will be available for viewing in the future. Let's cover a few logistics before we get started. Due to the high attendance, everyone will remain muted for the duration of the webinar. Please enter your questions into the Q&A box, and we have planned time at the end of the webinar to review those. I'm going to go off video now so that we have full bandwidth. Tell you a little bit about the presenter. I kind of like him. He's the ANSI National Accreditation Board Training Business Manager. I've got experience in multiple disciplines of international business and manufacturing. I've got 20 years in project management and large-scale project implementation. Six Sigma Master Black Belt, TQM expert. I've also owned a couple of businesses in Hangzhou, China. Have lived in Dubai working on projects there for the Sheikh, and have been an accreditation manager with ANAB. So let's talk about this. We'll begin a little bit with the definition of gap analysis. A gap analysis compares actual results with expected results. Organizations can use this gap analysis to evaluate a process area, a function, or specific goal to determine if the actual performance meets that goal or if there's a gap. Then actions can be defined and implemented to close that gap. Additionally, the gap analysis can be used to compare current processes with specified requirements, such as an organization comparing their policies, standard operating procedures to the requirements of a standard like ISO 17025, ISO 9001. The organization evaluates where it currently is and where it wants to go, then determines how to get there by filling the gaps. So what is the purpose of gap analysis? Well, it is really to assess that level of compliance with whatever external requirements have been put in place. It's normally done by somebody that's not directly associated with the organization or from that area that's being directly affected. And it's intended to present a snapshot in time of the level of compliance that an organization has with the requirements in place. Gap analysis can be used to meet the requirements of a standard and prepare for an external audit or assessment. Gaps here are areas where the organization's policies and procedures do not meet the requirements of the standard. Using gap analysis to prepare for an external audit or assessment is intended to reduce the number of nonconformities that could be found during that audit or assessment by proactively filling those gaps ahead of time. Gap analysis can also be used to improve a process, activity, or function. That process, activity, or function is evaluated for its current state. A desired state is defined, and the actions are identified to reach that desired state. Actions could include process changes, training, other actions to make changes to the process, activity, or functions to improve it to the desired state. When an organization wants to add capabilities, such as an expansion of its scope of accreditation, one way to ensure that the capabilities are achievable is through gap analysis. A gap analysis can identify areas of weakness that could result in a nonconformance in order to develop an action plan to meet the requirements of that new capability and ensure that resources are available for that capability, such as procedures, personnel, equipment, etc. And gap analysis also aids organizations in identifying risks. Many international standards require organizations to identify risks ahead of time. Gap analysis is one way to identify these risks because gaps in achievement or attainment of objective could translate into a risk to the organization. Keep in mind, however, that risk analysis is typically proactive in nature. Gap analysis is reactive. And then, as with meeting the requirements of a standard and preparing for an external audit or assessment, gap analysis can identify potential and actual nonconformities that can be addressed through root cause analysis, corrective action. We'll discuss each of these as we continue on. Now, one of the things is, let's talk about why we would want to use a gap analysis. Perhaps you're uncertain of how your systems fit within a documented framework of requirements. That's important to know before you go into an accreditation, before you go into an internal audit. You might use it because you've begun that process for accreditation, but you don't know whether you are meeting those minimum requirements. That's important to know, okay? Perhaps you've been tasked with taking a new department through the process for accreditation, and you don't know where your gaps are. You don't know what you're in compliance with. You're not certain where your standards and your procedures fit. And another reason is you want to document progress or where you are at in this waypoint in your accreditation journey. Once you do a gap analysis, it is, as we said earlier, it's a snapshot in time. And it says, okay, here's where you're in compliance. Here's where you're not. These are areas that you need to focus in on. That is a large purpose of a gap analysis. So what does this gap analysis give us? Well, it gives you a roadmap of the areas where you're in compliance, as well as those where you're not in compliance. It says, okay, these are things that you need to do. It gives you an analysis of the depth to which areas are not meeting requirements. Are your procedures just not complete? Do you not have a procedure? Have you not even addressed it? It tells you, to what level are you in compliance or not in compliance. It gives you a check for areas that are fully compliant with the requirements. And those requirements may be external requirements, they may be internal requirements, they may be a combination thereof. Okay. But the other thing that you get with a gap analysis is you get a prioritization for what are your next steps in this process going to be. And that's critical to the process. What you're really doing here is you're defining your gap, the difference between what your goal is and where your performance is. This could be any metric. Let's take, for example, revenue measured over a period of time that can then be compared against a numerical goal. The gap, which we define in that gap analysis, is the difference between those two values. You know, what is your numerical goal and what is your actual? That is the gap. Once once you know where your current state is, once you've gone through and you've conducted this gap analysis, and you know where your desired state is defined, The gap can be filled by putting in place an action plan to obtain the skills, the knowledge, the abilities, the documentation that are needed to reach that desired state. Remember, we talked about it being a roadmap. Well, that roadmap may say, hey, we don't have the documentation in this area, or this documentation is not fully complete, or we we do not appear to have personnel with the skills to operate this piece of equipment or to meet this requirement. Those are all things that are going to be defined by your gap analysis. So gap analysis has a whole bunch of different names. You'll hear it called by all different things. We've listed some of them here, such as a need or gap analysis, a needs analysis, a needs assessment. But one thing that a gap analysis is not is it's not a risk assessment. Risk assessment is forward looking. And we'll talk some other time about risk management and risk assessment. Gap analyses examine what is the current state and what is needed to reach a specific desired state. Okay. So now we've talked about a gap analysis. Let's talk about what is an internal audit. The definition is that it's a systematic, independent, and documented process for obtaining objective evidence and evaluating it objectively to determine the extent to which audit criteria are being fulfilled. Okay. Normally, this is going to be conducted by the organization itself, and it's conducted on its own practices and procedures. Sometimes it's done by its own internal personnel, or sometimes it's done with somebody that has been contracted by that organization. Okay. An internal audit, unlike a gap analysis, is not intended to be a snapshot in time. It is normally conducted in its entirety each year, whether it is conducted, pieces are conducted quarterly, whether the entire internal audit is conducted at once. It's conducted on an annual basis, and it is intended to take a look at where your process is in compliance, and it is conducted to both internal and external requirements. It is a way of looking at your compliance. It is also a way of looking back at where you were on a prior internal audit, measuring your progress, and it's a way of saying, okay, here's where we are now. Here are the actions that we're going to have to take in order to maintain this compliance. It is a way of maintaining compliance to internal and external requirements. Okay. So what are some of the purposes of an internal audit? Well, first thing is we're comparing what our actual practice is with the requirements. Now that is similar to a gap analysis, but it's different. In this case, we're providing assurance that your management system is operating effectively because it's looking at not just what are your gaps, it's looking at what are your processes for correcting things? What are your processes for making sure that things function effectively? It is intended to improve your organization's management system. Gap analysis is not looking at that, okay? But an internal audit is always looking at improving your organization's management system, okay? It is intended to assist in accomplishing your organizational objectives. It looks at how do you do that through management review. It looks at how do you do that through implementation of corrective actions. Okay. It also identifies areas of concern. It identifies which areas should we be looking at? Where are areas where our system is not working effectively? Are we with corrective actions? Are we going back in and looking at an effectiveness review at some period of time? Okay. It also allows management and insight into how this system is operating. Is it effective or not? So we are really quite interested in looking at that. So why would we conduct an internal audit? Um, well, an internal audit is a defined requirement for all external accreditations. You have to conduct an internal audit on a minimum annual basis. It also provides a continuous check for your internal systems. Uh, are are all of those internal systems functioning? Are you doing management reviews? Are you doing follow-up on corrective actions? Are you looking at how your data is presented to your clients, your customers? Okay. It provides specific details on your conformance to the requirements, both internal and external. And it is a key element in the methodology for continuous improvement. That is one of the standards of accreditation is continuous improvement and not believing that you can be in stasis. Okay. So what else does your internal audit provide? Well, it should be providing clear evidence that your management system is conforming to requirements, whether those requirements are internal or external. It also should identify opportunities for improvement, just like an external assessment identifies nonconformances and opportunities for improvement. You should also be doing that with your internal audit. It's not just where are my gaps? It's, hey, what could we be doing better? What could we improve upon? It also should be giving you direct lessons learned to help you with process improvement. Now let's talk about defining the internal audit. You've got to have a schedule. You have to have a plan to as to what areas you're going to review. You have to clearly define what is the scope of your internal audit and what are the criteria that you are going to be evaluating it. You have to have audit evidence. You have to have documented items that you have seen, reports, demonstration of activity, witness audits. And you, at the end of it, you have to come up with an audit report. These are things which are very different from a gap analysis. Is the intention similar? Yes. But they serve different purposes. And one of the reasons for today's webinar is because sometimes there seems to be a confusion between, well, isn't an internal audit a gap analysis? No, it's really not. Gap analysis is providing you with a snapshot in time. An internal audit is part of a much longer continuous process and cycle within the organization. So it serves a quite different purpose. And so let's talk about what some of the principles of auditing are. Now, these may not apply to gap analysis, particularly saying a risk-based approach. But when we talk about internal auditing, should we use integrity? Absolutely. Fair presentation. What does that mean? It means that you're looking at things from all sides and you're trying to bring all evidence forward. Utilizing due professional care, making sure that you are examining things from all different objectives. Maintaining confidentiality. When you are auditing, when you're conducting an internal audit, it's critical that you maintain the confidentiality of whether it be the internal organization that you're looking at, whether it be client confidentiality, etc. Maintaining independence. Yes, as an internal auditor, you have to show that you're independent from the area that you are auditing, that you're not being influenced by that. You have to utilize an evidence-based approach, meaning what do you physically see? Not what do you suppose, but what do you physically see? What documentation, what evidence, what records, what demonstration do you see in front of you? And one of the core principles of auditing is using a risk-based approach. When you prepare your audit plan, where are areas where you believe from your management system results, from your risk management approach, from your evaluation of prior years' audit results, where are areas where you believe risk exists and that you would like to place extra care, where you'd like to take an extra look at it. That's part of the principles of auditing as they apply to an internal audit. So let's look back at this and let's talk a little bit about the differences directly between a gap analysis and an internal audit. A gap analysis, this is used to specifically to determine gaps in compliance to requirements. Where are we missing things? How much of a miss do we have there? An internal audit is used to document conformity to requirements, whether those are internal or external requirements. A gap analysis is often performed before or during the process or program for development and implementation. So you're doing it let's say, okay, we want to go through this process of we want to get accreditation in a year. Okay. What are the steps we need to take to get there? What things are really goofed up or just not in place? That's what a gap analysis is supposed to identify. An internal audit is performed after a process or program has been developed and implemented. It's as you're going through the process. It's as you're continuing that system. A gap analysis is commonly performed by someone external to the organization. And that's something that you may not think about is that, yes, it's often performed by somebody who's got expertise in this is where you want to go. This is my knowledge of those requirements. And here's where you do not meet. An internal audit is commonly performed by personnel within the organization. You might have somebody external do it, but it's more common to be done by personnel that are part of that organization. A gap analysis is used to define gaps when you're on your way to accreditation. Okay. An internal audit is used to determine your ongoing compliance to those requirements and additional new requirements. A gap analysis, you're only doing it when you need it. It might be done once in the life of an organization. It might be done once in the life of a department, or if you want to get a new accreditation. Your internal audit, you're going to conduct that annually. It is part of your ongoing system of management and of your compliance to the requirements of your accreditation or certification body. A gap analysis, it sets a roadmap for you in order to help you achieve a goal. Your internal audit measures your compliance to those established parameters. Okay? The gap analysis also is going to help you set a time frame for achieving that goal. Based on what you see in that gap, is it realistic to try and achieve that goal in 6 months? Are there things that are going to take 9 months, 12 months, 18 months to achieve? Your internal audit helps meet your time frame for maintaining accreditation, saying, okay, here are some things that we haven't documented well enough, or here are some issues that we have with nonconformances. How do we correct those before our next accreditation? One of the things that's interesting about an internal audit is if items are identified in your internal audit, as long as you can show that you're working on them and you've got an action plan and a time frame, your accreditation assessment is likely going to say, okay, yes, this is a shortfall, but it's being addressed by such and such action, and that will be the follow-up. So that's a difference. That's a key difference between a gap analysis and an internal audit in terms of implementation. Okay, so there are many additional resources to talk about the differences between gap analysis and internal audits. We've had a few questions that have come through, and we're going to get to those after we discuss a couple additional resources available for accredited laboratories or laboratories seeking accreditation. Some of those additional resources are, we have webcasts on a regular basis. You can find those here. These webinars, every single one of our webinars are recorded and are available for you to review or your colleagues to review. We present a blog that is updated on a weekly basis, and it has a wealth of information related to risk, accreditation, standard requirements, and a lot of other topics. And ANAB offers live, online, in-person training and self-paced training in many areas, including internal auditing, standard requirements, measurement confidence, risk analysis, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, so questions. So one of the first questions is, based on a risk-based approach, would this dictate that the entire system is not required to be audited in its entirety annually, as long as you can demonstrate this in the audit plan and data? That's a very interesting question. A risk-based approach doesn't say that you can't audit the entire system. What a risk-based approach says is that perhaps we need to place more emphasis on this area. You put yourself in an interesting position if you say, we don't believe there's any risk in this area, so we're not going to cover it. Part of the requirements for an internal audit are that you demonstrate compliance in each area. That risk-based approach says, where are the areas where we need, I want you to think about it more as an area that we need to place more focus on than less. Okay. The next question is, do we have to conduct an internal audit to each process on an annual basis? The short answer to that is no. Um, if you're let's say you've got 35 different items on your scope of accreditation. What you're going to do is you're going to pick a representative sample of those. Now, are you going to go through things which look at your management review? Yes. Are you going to pick things which look at your document control? Yes. Are you going to look at procedures? Yes. But are you going to look at every single item that your laboratory, your inspection body, your calibration house uh, does every single activity? No. You're going to look at a representative sample and you're going to say, okay, we've looked at this. Hey, this shows how we've got training in place for personnel. This shows how we have documentation for how we are recording data. This shows all of the aspects associated with that. So, no, do you have to conduct an internal audit on each process on an annual basis? No, because the standard is looking for compliance with all the sections of the standard. It's not looking for you to conduct an audit on every single process. And that is why it's called an audit, not a comprehensive system review. Um, let's see. Are there any other questions out there? I see one being typed right now. How often should a gap analysis be conducted? That's an interesting question. My answer to that is a gap analysis is normally necessary when you're putting a new system or new requirement in place. When you do that, it allows you to define what those gaps are. Unlike an internal audit, which is done on an annual basis to an audit plan to collect data, your gap analysis is really to say, gee, how far do we have to run down this road before we get to the finish line? What are the obstacles that we need to be prepared for? Do we need to have this type of tool? Do we need to have this type of training? It's to identify those. Those are the things that are intended. Okay. Well, that looks like the questions that we have. If you'd like additional information about training offered by ANAB, you can contact us at training@anab.org. If you have questions about accreditation or the services ANAB provides related to accreditation, contact ANAB at anab.org. And finally, if you are ready for a quote for accreditation services or for training, contact Roger Muse at rmuse@anab.org. Okay, there is a question here. Will we get a copy of these slides? Will you get a copy of the PowerPoint? What we do is we record this presentation. This entire presentation will be available normally within about 48 hours. If you go to the anab.org site under training and you look at webinars, there will be a section that has all of our recorded webinars there. Okay. Everyone, thank you for your attention. I hope that this has been beneficial and I appreciate your time. Again, I'm David Feist, ANAB. Thank you.